What do you do when making the person you love happy also means breaking your own heart? When staying quiet feels like love, and speaking up feels like you might lose them forever? This is the story of two best friends who loved each other in silence. 10 years ago, the Brooklyn skyline had never looked more beautiful, and Jason Edward hated it for that. He stood on the rooftop of their Prospect Heights brownstone, his pale fingers gripping a sweating beer bottle, watching Manhattan's lights blur and sharpen with each anxious breath. Behind him, the party they'd thrown raged on, classmates celebrating freedom, dancing to music that thumped through the floorboards. But up here it was just the two of them, the way it had always been. Stephanie Ronald sat on the ledge, her dark brown legs dangling over the edge, her natural curls catching the warm June breeze, the city lights reflected in her deep brown eyes, making them look like they held entire galaxies. She wore that yellow sundress he loved, the one that made her skin glow like burnished bronze. "Can you believe we actually survived?" she said, her voice carrying that melody he'd memorized over 4 years of late nights and early mornings, of shared coffees and shared silences. Jason's hazel eyes traced the curve of her shoulder, the elegant line of her neck. "Tell her." His heart hammered against his ribs. "Tell her now." "Steph, The words caught in his throat like broken glass. She turned to him, and God, that smile. That smile that had been his undoing since the day they'd met in that crowded lecture hall, when she'd sat beside him and asked to borrow a pen, and he'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love with his best friend. "I got the offer," he said instead, "the coward's exit. The tech company in London. They want me to start in 2 months. He watched her face, desperately searching for what? Devastation, curse, a plea for him to stay. Some sign that she felt even a fraction of what was tearing him apart inside. But Stephanie's smile only widened, even as something flickered in her eyes, something that disappeared too quickly for him to name. "Jason, oh my God!" She jumped up, throwing her arms around him, and he breathed in the coconut scent of her hair, memorizing it, knowing he'd never be this close to heaven again. "That's incredible, London. This is everything you've worked for." His arms tightened around her waist. "Ask me to stay. Please, Steph, just ask," his heart pleaded. But when she pulled back, her eyes were bright with excitement or maybe unshed tears. He couldn't tell in the dark, and her hands squeezed his shoulders. "When do you leave?" 8 weeks. His voice sounded hollow. I haven't accepted yet." "Haven't, Jason? Are you insane? This is your dream." She grabbed his face between her hands, her touch sending electricity through every nerve. "You take that offer. You go to London. You become everything you're meant to be." "I'm meant to be yours," he wanted to scream. "I'm meant to wake up to you every morning. I'm meant to grow old knowing what your laugh sounds like first thing in the day." "What if?" he started. "No what ifs," she said firmly, dropping her hands. She turned back to the skyline, and he could swear he saw her wipe at her eyes. "You're going to be amazing, Jay. You're going to change the world." The music from below swelled, some song about young hearts and wild dreams. He stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching, the space between them an ocean neither knew how to cross. "Promise me something," he said quietly. "Anything. Don't forget me when I'm gone." She laughed, but it sounded broken. "How could I forget you? You're my person." "Then be mine," his heart pleaded. But his mouth said, "You're mine too, Steph, always." They stayed on that rooftop until dawn, painted the sky purple and gold, talking about everything except the truth burning between them. When the party died and the last guests stumbled home, they walked down to Junior's restaurant on Flatbush, their tradition, ordering cheesecake they were too heartsick to eat. "We'll stay in touch," she said, pushing crumbs around her plate. "FaceTime every week. Nothing has to change." Everything had already changed. They both knew it. He walked her home as the city woke up around them, past the bodega, where they'd bought midnight snacks, past the park where they'd studied for finals, past every corner that held a memory of them, at their building stoop, their stoop, where they'd shared 1,000 conversations and 1,000,000 unspoken confessions. She turned to him. "I'm really proud of you, Jay." She kissed his cheek, her lips warm against his skin, lingering just long enough to feel like goodbye. Then she pulled away and climbed the steps without looking back. Jason stood there as the sun rose over Brooklyn, watching her disappear, knowing he should chase her, knowing he should burst through that door and tell her that London meant nothing, that success meant nothing, that the whole damn world meant nothing without her in it. But he didn't. He went inside, packed his bags, and left before she woke up. Because sometimes loving someone means breaking both your hearts, if you're fool enough to believe they deserve better than you. Present day. Stephanie's hands trembled as she held the eviction notice, the official letterhead blurring through her tears. 60 days to vacate. She sank to the hardwood floor of her bedroom. Their bedroom, the one they'd shared for 4 years, laughing about their futures like they'd always be in them together. The afternoon light slanted through the same windows that had watched them dance to Marvin Gaye at 2 a.m., that had witnessed their whispered conversations. When the world felt too big and too small all at once, this apartment wasn't just walls and floors. It was every memory that mattered. Stephanie had become everything she'd planned. At 32, she was a successful civil rights attorney, her name on the door of a prestigious Brooklyn firm. She had the brownstone in Prospect Heights she'd refused to leave, even when the rent increased, even when friends told her she was holding on to ghosts. She had the career, the reputation, the life she'd built with her own fierce determination. What she didn't have was him. 10 years. 10 years of dating men who looked at her like she was a prize to be won, not a person to be known. 10 years of first dates that never led to seconds, of relationships that crumbled because she was measuring every man against the ghost of the one who'd left. 10 years of pretending she didn't still sleep on the left side of the bed, leaving room for someone who was never coming back. She'd learned to survive disappointment by expecting it, by armoring her heart so thoroughly that no one could hurt her again. Except this, the building being sold, 60 days to leave the only place she'd ever been truly happy. Her phone sat beside her. She knew his number by heart still, even though they only texted now. Safe surface-level updates. Made partner. Congratulations, dating someone new. Hope it works out. She left. Sorry to hear that. Always sorry. Never honest. Stephanie picked up her phone. London was 5 hours ahead. It was 8 p.m. there. He'd be home from work, probably making dinner in whatever sterile apartment he lived in. Probably alone because, according to his carefully edited texts, he was always alone. Just like her. Her finger hovered over his name. This was a mistake. What was he going to do from across an ocean? What could he possibly? She pressed call. It rang once, twice. Steph? His voice deeper now, but still unmistakably him. Still the sound that felt like home. Everything okay? And just like that, 10 years of carefully constructed walls crumbled to dust. They're selling the building, she whispered, her voice breaking. Jay, they're selling our building and I can't, I'm coming home. What? I'm coming home, Stephanie, tonight. Don't pack anything. Don't go anywhere. I'm coming home. The line went quiet except for their breathing. An ocean apart, but suddenly, impossibly close. Why, she asked, though she was terrified of the answer. His voice was rough, raw with something that sounded like 10 years of suppressed truth. Because you called. Because you're crying. Because I never should have left in the first place. Stephanie closed her eyes, pressing the phone against her heart, and let herself believe. Just for a moment, in second chances. Outside her window, Brooklyn carried on, indifferent to breaking hearts and breaking points, to the space between what we want and what we allow ourselves to have. But somewhere over the Atlantic, a man who'd spent a decade running was finally coming home. 24 hours later, Jason's hands shook as the taxi crawled through. Brooklyn traffic. He'd left London 14 hours ago, with nothing but a carry-on and a heart full of reckless hope. No plan, no second thoughts. Just Stephanie's broken voice echoing in his head, and the certainty that he'd wasted 10 years being a coward. The morning light hit Fort Greene Park as they passed, golden and merciless, illuminating every familiar corner he'd tried to forget. The bodega on the corner where they'd bought beer with fake IDs. The vintage shop where Stephanie had found that yellow dress. Each block was a memory he'd buried alive, and now they were clawing their way back to the surface. Clinton Hill rolled past the window, those beautiful brownstone-lined streets that had cradled their youth. Jason pressed his forehead against the cool glass, jet lag mixing with something heavier. What if she'd changed her mind? What if that 8 p.m. phone call had been grief-talking, not an invitation? His phone buzzed. Landed yet? His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He could see she'd been typing and deleting for the past 3 minutes, those telltale dots appearing and disappearing like her nerve. "Meet me at Café Regular in an hour," he typed back. "Neutral ground, safe coward," his conscience whispered. The brownstone appeared like a ghost, and Jason's breath caught. Nothing had changed. The same iron railings, the same stone steps where they'd sat countless nights, solving the world's problems and ignoring their own, where he'd fallen in love with her 1,000 times over. Jason exhaled shakily and gave the driver the address of a hotel in Dumbo, staring at her bedroom windows. Their windows. Was she up there right now, just as terrified as he was? His phone buzzed again. "I'll be there." Café Regular in Park Slope was packed with the Sunday brunch crowd, but Jason spotted her immediately. Stephanie sat by the window, her hair pulled back in a low bun, her burgundy blouse catching the light. She was reading something on her phone, her brow furrowed in that way that meant she was anxious, and God, 10 years and an ocean hadn't dimmed a single thing he felt for her. She looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. The cafe noise faded to white static. Jason saw her lips part slightly, saw her grip tighten on her phone, saw the same terrified hope he felt, reflected in her deep brown eyes. Then she stood up too quickly, nearly knocking over her water glass. Jason crossed the room on autopilot, and suddenly they were standing face to face, 3 feet and 10 years between them. "Hi," she breathed. "Hi." His voice cracked on the single syllable. Then they were hugging, and it was like every cell in his body remembered this, remembered her. She fit against him exactly the same way, her head tucked perfectly beneath his chin, breathing in the coconut scent that still haunted his dreams, her hands pressed flat against his back. And he felt like coming home. "You actually came," she whispered against his chest. "Did you think I wouldn't?" She pulled back and he could see the answer in her eyes. Yes. She'd thought he wouldn't, because he'd left before, because 10 years ago, when it mattered most, he'd chosen an ocean over her and left without saying goodbye. "I'm here, Steph, I'm here." They sat, ordered coffee neither of them would drink, and drowned in awkward silence. Jason watched her tuck her hair behind her ear, that nervous habit she'd never lost, and felt his heart compress. "So she started London. How is—" "I'm staying in Brooklyn for a while," he interrupted. "There's some business I need to handle here. Tech startup stuff, boring." The lie tasted like ash. But what was he supposed to say? "I bought your building because I couldn't stand the thought of you being displaced from the house that meant so much more to us." "How long is a while?" "I don't know yet. A few months, maybe longer. My company's letting me work remotely." All true, technically. He'd negotiated that deal the same day he'd wired the money for the brownstone. Stephanie studied him with those deep brown lawyer eyes that had always seen too much. "You flew across an ocean on 12 hours' notice for business stuff?" "And for you." The truth slipped out before he could stop it. "You called Steph, you were crying." "Where else would I be?" Something flickered across her face. Hope, maybe, or fear, or both tangled together. "I shouldn't have called. It wasn't fair to stop." He reached across the table, his pale hand hovering near her darker one, not quite touching. "You can always call me, day or night, London or Brooklyn or anywhere in between. That hasn't changed, hasn't it?" Her voice was so quiet he almost missed it. "Everything else has." "Not everything." Their eyes held, and Jason felt the weight of 10 years pressing down. Every unanswered text that had really been saying "I miss you," every carefully casual phone call that had really meant "come home," every holiday alone that had whispered "this should have been us." "Walk with me?" He stood, offering his hand before he could overthink it. "Like we used to." Stephanie stared at his outstretched palm, his pale skin against the dark wood table, and he saw the war in her eyes. The part of her that wanted to run, and the part that had never stopped waiting. She took his hand. Prospect Park was alive with Sunday joggers and families, dogs chasing frisbees, couples on blankets pretending the rest of the world didn't exist. Jason and Stephanie walked the familiar path around the lake, their hands no longer touching, but their bodies unconsciously close, like magnets fighting their own pull. "Remember when we came here the night before your constitutional law final?" Jason asked, nodding toward a bench overlooking the water. "You made me take a break because I was spiraling." A small smile played at her lips. We sat right there for 3 hours. You quizzed me on case law until midnight. You aced that exam. Because of you." She glanced at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "You always believed in me more than I believed in myself." "That's not true. You are the strongest person I've ever known." "Strong." She laughed, but it was edged with bitterness. "I'm about to be evicted from the only place I've ever felt at home, the only place I've ever been happier." She finished quietly, looking away. "Pathetic, right? I'm 32 years old, a successful attorney, and I'm clinging to ghosts. Jason, that's not strong." He stopped walking. "Look at me." "Say it," his heart begged. "Tell her you love her, that you never stopped. Tell her every woman you dated was just a way to survive, missing her. Tell her the truth." She looked at him reluctantly, and he saw the exhaustion etched into her beautiful face, the weight of 10 years pretending not to need anyone. "It's the only place I've ever felt like I belonged to." "You kept that apartment because it meant something," he said quietly. "That's not pathetic. Steph, that's—" He swallowed hard. "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard." "Do you ever think about it?" Stephanie asked suddenly. "Our first night in the apartment?" "I think about it all the time," Jason admitted quietly. "That promise we made, chosen family. We broke it," Stephanie said, her voice tight. "The minute you got on that plane, we broke it." "I know." They stopped walking. The lake stretched beside them, the city skyline visible in the distance, the whole world carrying on oblivious to the fact that two people were trying to find their way back to each other. "Why are you really here, Jason?" Stephanie turned to face him. "And don't say business. I know you." "There's something you're not telling me." He wanted to tell her everything. About the building. About the 10 years of failed relationships, because no one was her. About how he'd rebuilt his entire life around the hole she'd left in it. "I'm here because you called," he said instead. "Because you needed someone, and I couldn't be an ocean away from you anymore." "Jay, I'm staying in Brooklyn," he continued, the words tumbling out. "I talked to my company. They're letting me work remotely. I'm moving back, Steph, not for a few weeks." For good, her eyes widened. "You're moving back? Just like that?" "Just like that. Why? Because I love you. Because I never stopped. Because 10 years was long enough to be without you. Because this is home," he said instead. "It always was." Stephanie stared at him, and he watched her process it. The implications, the proximity, the dangerous possibility of trying again. "Where are you staying?" she asked finally. "Hotel in Dumbo for now. I'll figure something out." "That's ridiculous. You'll spend a fortune." She stopped walking, and when she spoke again, her voice was careful, measured. "The brownstone has 2 bedrooms, if you wanted to. I mean, it's still our apartment till 60 days anyway. And," Jason's heart stuttered, "and nothing." "Forget it." Color rose in her cheeks. "That was stupid. You probably want your space after." They walked back toward Park Slope as the sun started to set, painting Brooklyn in shades of amber and rose. Jason's hand brushed hers twice. Accidents that felt like lightning strikes, but neither of them acknowledged it. When they reached her building, their building, the brownstone stood like a monument to everything they'd been and everything they'd lost. "Thank you," Stephanie said, climbing the first step. "For coming. For being here." "Steph," she turned, and suddenly they were eye level, her on the step above him, close enough that he could count the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, close enough to kiss her if he just leaned forward 6 inches. "I'm glad you're back," she whispered. His hand lifted of its own accord, reaching for her face, for connection, for permission. Her breath caught. Time suspended. Then a car alarm blared down the street, shattering the moment. Stephanie stepped back. "I should go." "Early court tomorrow, right? Yeah, of course." She fumbled with her keys, not looking at him. "Maybe we could do this again? Coffee or a walk or any time," Jason said. "I'm here, Steph. I'm not going anywhere." She nodded, gave him one last loaded look and disappeared inside. Jason stood on the stoop, their stoop, where everything had begun, watching the light turn on in her bedroom windows. The same window he used to watch for when he came home late from the library. The same window that had been the last thing he'd looked at before his cab to the airport 10 years ago. He pulled out his phone and looked at the property documents his lawyer had sent. Edward Holdings LLC owner Jason Edward. He'd bought her home. He'd moved across an ocean. He'd upended his entire life. And he still couldn't tell her the one true thing that mattered. That he'd been in love with her since she was 22 years old. And every day without her had been a form of slow drowning. Jason sat on the stoop as Brooklyn settled into evening, exactly where their story began, wondering if courage was something you found or something you built, brick by brick, until you were finally strong enough to risk everything. Above him, Stephanie's light glowed warm against the darkening sky. Tomorrow, he promised himself. Tomorrow I'll tell her about the purchase. But tomorrow was a long way off, and the Brooklyn night was full of ghosts. It's been 2 weeks since Jason's return. Stephanie stood outside Jason's hotel suite, at the One Hotel Brooklyn Bridge, her hand raised to knock, hesitating. 2 weeks of carefully orchestrated coffee dates. 2 weeks of surface-level conversations about work, about London, about everything except what actually mattered. 2 weeks of dancing around each other like strangers who used to be everything. She knocked. Jason opened the door and her breath still caught. He wore jeans and a NYU t-shirt, casual, rumpled, heartbreakingly familiar. His hazel eyes lit up when he saw her. "Steph, hey." He smiled, stepping aside. "This is a surprise. Come in." The suite was all glass and steel, temporary and cold, the kind of place where successful people stayed when they were too afraid to go home. Nothing like him, nothing like home. She noticed his laptop open on the dining table, papers scattered everywhere. "Sorry about the mess. I was just reviewing some—" He moved toward the table quickly, but not quickly enough. Stephanie's eyes caught on the letterhead. "Property deed, 847 Prospect Heights, Brownstone." Her heart stopped. She crossed to the table, picking up the document. Her hands trembled as she read. Edward Holdings, LLC, owner Jason Edward. Purchase date, the date she'd called him crying. "You bought it." She looked up at him, the betrayal sharp and immediate. "You bought the building and didn't tell me." Jason's face went pale. "Steph, just like you left without saying goodbye." The words came out quiet, deadly. "You made this huge decision and just what? Hoped I wouldn't find out? It's not like that. Then what is it like, Jason?" 10 years of suppressed pain rose to the surface, because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what you did before. You decided London was best. You decided leaving without saying goodbye was better. And now you've decided to buy my building without asking me what I truly want. I was trying to help. I didn't ask for your help. Her voice cracked. I asked you to come home because I was hurting and I needed... She stopped, the truth too dangerous. You needed what? His voice was rough, desperate. What did you need, Stephanie? I needed you here. I needed my best friend. I needed the one person who understood me, who knew me, and instead I got... She gestured at the papers. I got secrets. I got decisions made behind my back. I got the same Jason who disappeared 10 years ago without a word. That's not fair, isn't it? Tears burned her eyes. You left, Jason. You packed your bags and left, while I was sleeping because you couldn't even face me long enough to say goodbye. And now you're here and you're doing it again, making choices, hiding things, keeping me at arm's length while pretending everything's fine. I'm not keeping you at arm's length, then why didn't you tell me? She threw the papers down. We've had coffee 5 times. We've walked through half of Brooklyn. You've texted me good morning every single day and not once, not once. Did you think to mention you bought my home? Jason ran his hand through his hair, cornered. Because I didn't know how to tell you. How about Steph? I bought the building. 5 words, Jason. That's all it would have taken. And then what? His composure finally cracked. You would have looked at me the same way you're looking at me now. Like I'm some controlling asshole who can't mind his own business. Like I overstepped. His voice broke. You want the truth? His eyes flashed with something raw and painful. I bought that building because I couldn't stand the thought of you losing it. You kept it for 10 years. It's us, Steph. Because that apartment is every memory that matters. Every late night we stayed up talking. Every morning we made coffee together. Every moment he stopped abruptly. Every moment you what? Nothing, no. She stepped closer, her heart pounding. Say it. For once in your life, just say what you actually mean. Fine, the word came out ragged. It's the place where I fell in love with you. Where I spent 4 years being your best friend. When all I wanted was more. Where I died a little every day, knowing I wasn't good enough for you and never would be. Stephanie's world tilted. So when you called me crying, Jason continued, his voice shaking, I didn't think. I just acted. Because that building meant so much to us, and is the only piece of you I had left. And I couldn't let it disappear too. You left. The words barely made it past her lips. You left me, Jason, not the other way around, because you told me to go. The words burst out of him raw and ragged. You stood on that rooftop and told me to take the job, to go live my dream. And I waited, God, Steph. I waited for you to give me one reason to stay. What? I didn't want London. I wanted you. He was breathing hard now. 10 years of suppressed truth pouring out. I told you about the offer because I hoped and prayed you'd ask me not to go. That you'd say you needed me here. That I'd what? Beg you to give up your future for me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I loved you too much for that. The confession exploded out of her. I loved you so much I couldn't breathe sometimes. And when you told me about London, I thought you were letting me down easy. I thought you were telling me you were leaving. Because you didn't feel the same way. Jason stared at her like she'd struck him. What? You stood on that rooftop and told me about this amazing opportunity. And I waited, Jason. I waited for you to say something else. To say you wanted me to come with you. And I would have gone to the ends of the earth with you. Or literally anything that meant I mattered more than a job. Tears streamed down her face. But you just stood there and I realized you wanted an out. That I was convenient while we were in school. But now you had a chance at a real life and I wasn't part of it. No, so I smiled. Her voice broke completely. I smiled and told you how proud I was. Because making you happy mattered, more than having you. And then you left without saying goodbye and I knew I'd been right. That you couldn't wait to get away from me. That's not, Jason crossed to her, gripping her shoulders. Steph, you have it all wrong. Then tell me. She pushed at his chest. Tell me what really happened. Because for 10 years I've told myself you didn't care. That I was easy to leave without a goodbye. And I need to know if I was wrong. You were wrong. His hands cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. God, Stephanie, you were so wrong. I loved you so much. And I was hoping you'd ask me to stay. That you felt the same way I did. Her breath caught. But when you got excited for me, he continued, his voice cracking. When you encouraged me to go, I thought that was my answer. That you didn't want me the way I wanted you. That you were relieved to have an easy way to get rid of me. Jason, so I left without saying goodbye, because if I had to look at you one more time, if I had to see your face, I would have broken down and begged you to ask me to stay. His thumbs wiped at her tears, and I couldn't face that rejection twice. Couldn't hear you tell me again that leaving was the right choice. I never wanted you to leave, not without me, she whispered. And I never wanted to go. He rested his forehead against hers. I wanted you. I've always wanted you. Every woman I dated, every relationship I tried, they all failed because they weren't you. Because nothing was ever you. Me too, the words tumbled out. Every man I met I measured against you. Every first date, every relationship, they all fell apart because I was looking for you in all of them. And finding nothing. Steph, I still love you, Jason. She gripped his shirt. The truth finally free. After 10 years, after everything, I still love you and I hate myself for it. I hate that I kept that apartment like a shrine. I hate that I never moved on. I hate that you can walk back into my life and I just fall apart. Jason's breath hitched. Say that again. I love you. It came easier this time, like a dam breaking. I love you, Jason. I never stopped. I just convinced myself he kissed her. Desperate and urgent and 10 years overdue. His hands tangled in her hair, and she kissed him back with equal ferocity, tasting salt from both their tears. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. I'm sorry I'm such a coward, he whispered. Steph, I'm so sorry. Sorry I left. Sorry I didn't tell you about the building. Sorry I keep screwing this up. I'm sorry too, for not being brave enough to tell you the truth back then, for letting you leave without fighting for us. We're disasters. Complete disasters. She laughed through her tears. Two idiots who've been in love for 10 years and were too scared to say it. Jason pulled back just enough to see her face, his hazel eyes searching hers. I'm saying it now. I love you, Stephanie Ronald. I've loved you since we were 20s, and I'll love you until I stop breathing. Move in with me, he said. Not the hotel. The brownstone, our home. Let me come home for real this time. Let me prove that I'm not going anywhere ever again. What if we mess this up? Fear flickered across her face. What if we try and it doesn't work? What if, then we mess it up together? He kissed her softly. But I'd rather try and fail with you than succeed at anything else without you. You're it for me, Steph. You always have been. She searched his eyes and saw the truth there. The love, the fear, the desperate hope that this time, finally they could get it right. Okay, she whispered. Let's go home. They kissed again, slower this time, sweeter, a promise being made and accepted. When they finally pulled apart, Jason rested his forehead against hers, both of them smiling through tears. No more secrets, she said firmly. No more hiding. If we're doing this, we do it honestly. No more secrets, he agreed. I promise. They packed his things together, hands brushing, stealing kisses between folded clothes, and when they stepped out into the Brooklyn night, hand in hand, walking toward the brownstone that had witnessed their beginning and their breaking, I want to build us a real home, one that honors our past but gives us room for our future. Stephanie felt something shift in her chest. Hope. Real. Terrifying, beautiful hope, because some love stories don't end when people leave. They just wait, patient and persistent, for both people to be brave enough to start over. 6 months in, the brownstone smelled like cinnamon and coffee, like Sunday mornings and second chances. Jason had transformed the parlor floor into an open-concept space, with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the rooms with light. They had more rooms, and the tiny kitchen where they'd once bumped elbows making coffee was now a chef's dream. With marble countertops and room to breathe, their bedroom had a walk-in closet and an ensuite bathroom with a clawfoot tub. Stephanie had fallen in love with immediately, but Jason had kept what mattered. The original hardwood floors they'd danced on, the bay windows where they'd sat talking until dawn, the bones of the place that held all their memories. He'd made it better without erasing what it had been. Stephanie woke to find Jason's arm draped across her waist, his face buried in her natural curls, his breathing deep and even. 6 months, and she still wasn't used to this. The weight of him beside her, the certainty of waking up and finding him there. She traced the line of his jaw with her finger, and his eyes fluttered open, hazel and sleep-soft. Morning, he murmured, pulling her closer. Morning. She kissed him. Slow and sweet, tasting forever. You have that investor meeting today. Don't care. He nuzzled her neck. Want to stay right here? Jason, 5 more minutes. His hand slid down her spine. Please. She laughed, the sound free and unguarded, in a way she'd forgotten she could be. You said that an hour ago, and I'll say it again in 5 minutes. He rolled on top of her, bracing himself on his forearms, looking down at her with so much love it made her chest ache. I love you. You tell me that every morning, and I'll tell you every morning for the rest of our lives. He kissed her slowly, deeply. Get used to it, counselor. Stephanie smiled against his mouth. I'm trying. 6 months of learning how to love without armor. 6 months of fights about whose turn it was to do dishes, of making up on the kitchen counter, of building something real from honesty and hope. It hadn't been perfect. Both of them still flinched sometimes, still waited for the other shoe to drop. But they'd kept their promise. No more secrets, no more running. When Stephanie's biggest case fell apart in court, Jason had held her while she cried, then sat with her until she found the loophole that won on appeal. When Jason considered starting his own tech company in New York, they'd planned it together, late-night spreadsheets and risk assessments, building his dream with her by his side, partners in every sense. They were building a life, messy and imperfect and theirs. Later, after Jason left for the office and Stephanie settled in her home office, with case files, her phone buzzed. Dinner tonight? I have something to tell you. Jay. Her heart did a small flip. Should I be nervous? Maybe, in a good way. She stared at the phone, hope and terror warring in her chest. They'd talked about the future in abstract terms. Someday, eventually, when we're ready. But maybe someday was now. Juniors. 7 p.m. Perfect. I love you. I love you too. Stephanie pressed the phone to her chest, letting herself feel it, the joy, the fear, the wild impossibility of having everything she'd ever wanted. That evening, Jason sat in their booth at Junior's, the same one they'd claimed a decade ago, his hands sweating around the small velvet box in his pocket. He'd planned this moment 1,000 times, on the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset, at the hotel where they'd first confessed, but in the end he'd chosen here, juniors on Flatbush, where they'd shared 1,000 meals, where they'd been just Jason and Steph before the world got complicated. Stephanie walked in and his breath caught. She wore a deep green dress that made her skin glow, her hair framing her face in soft curls. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Hi." She slid into the booth across from him, her smile nervous. "You're looking very serious." "Am I?" He reached for her hand. "Maybe I'm just thinking about how lucky I am." Smooth talker. But she laced her fingers through his, and he felt the slight tremor in them. She was nervous too. They ordered cheesecake, their tradition, and talked about everything and nothing. Her new case, his meeting with his investors. Normal everyday things that felt miraculous because they were sharing them. When the cheesecake arrived, Jason couldn't eat. "Okay," Stephanie set down her fork. "You're freaking me out. What's going on? I need to tell you something." Her face went pale. "Oh, Jay, you're having cold feet. No." He squeezed her hand. "Steph, no. The opposite, actually." He took a breath, his heart hammering. 10 years ago, I sat in this booth and watched you leave, and I thought I'd lost my chance, that I'd been too scared to say something." He smiled shakily. "I spent a decade convincing myself I could build a life without you. And I did, sort of. I had the career, the success, all the things I thought mattered. But it was all hollow, Steph. All of it. Because none of it meant anything without you." Tears welled in her eyes. "These last 6 months have been," his voice cracked, "they've been everything. Waking up next to you, fighting with you about leaving dishes in the sink, making up with you, building this messy, complicated, beautiful life together." He slid out of the booth, kneeling beside her, and her hand flew to her mouth. "I don't want to just live with you, Stephanie. I don't want to just love you." He pulled out the box, opening it to reveal a sapphire ring, the color of the Brooklyn sky at twilight, the color of the nights they'd spent dreaming together. "I want to marry you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want to wake up every morning knowing you're mine and I'm yours. I want to fight with you and make up with you and grow old knowing that I finally chose right. That I chose you. That I'll keep choosing you every single day for the rest of my life." Stephanie was crying openly now, her hands shaking. "Stephanie Ronald," he continued, "you've been my best friend, my chosen family, my home since the day we met. Will you let me spend forever proving that you were always the right choice? Will you marry me?" "Yes." The word came out as a sob. "Yes, Jay, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him up, kissing him hard enough to taste both their tears. Around them, the restaurant erupted in applause, but Jason didn't hear it. All he heard was her saying yes over and over against his lips. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much. I love you too." He cupped her face, wiping her tears with his thumbs. "Thank you for giving me a second chance. For being brave enough to let me come home. Thank you for coming back." She kissed him again, softer this time. "For choosing me. I'll always choose you." 8 months later, Prospect Park had never looked more beautiful. Under the canopy of trees near the lake, surrounded by friends and family, Stephanie stood across from Jason, her hands in his, her heart so full she thought it might burst. He wore a charcoal suit that made his hazel eyes impossibly bright. She wore an ivory dress that her mother had cried over, simple and elegant, with her natural hair crowned in flowers. "You're staring," she whispered. "Can't help it." His voice was thick with emotion. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The officiant smiled. "Jason, your vows." Jason took a shaky breath, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "Stephanie, 10 years ago I made the biggest mistake of my life. I let fear convince me that leaving was safer than staying. That protecting my heart mattered more than fighting for yours." His voice cracked. "I was wrong. And I spent a decade learning that lesson the hard way." Tears slipped down Stephanie's cheeks. "But you gave me something I didn't deserve. A second chance, a way home." He smiled through his own tears. "So I promise you this. I will never run again. I will never hide from hard conversations or difficult truths. I will choose you every single day in every single way. I will love you through fights and forgiveness, through joy and heartbreak, through all the messy, beautiful chaos of building a life together." He squeezed her hands. "You were my best friend, my chosen family, and now you're my forever, and I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that gift." Stephanie's turn. She took a trembling breath. "Jason, You were the first person who saw me, really saw me, and didn't run. Who knew all my sharp edges and loved me anyway. She laughed through her tears. I spent 10 years trying to convince myself I didn't need you. That I could build a life alone. That wanting someone made me weak. But you taught me that loving someone, choosing someone is the bravest thing we can do. Jason's eyes glistened. So I promise you this, she continued. I will trust you with my whole heart even when it's scary. I will tell you the truth even when it's hard. I will fight for us when things get difficult, because you're worth fighting for. We're worth fighting for. Her voice broke. You are my home, Jason Edward. You always have been. And I will spend forever proving that you were right to come back. That we were right to try again. The rings, the officiant prompted gently. They exchanged bands, simple gold, engraved with coordinates, the brownstone's address, the place where everything began. By the power vested in me, the officiant said, smiling, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jason, you may kiss your bride. Jason pulled Stephanie to him, kissing her like he'd kissed her that first time in his hotel suite, desperate and joyful and full of promise. Their guests cheered. But all Stephanie heard was Jason whispering against her lips. I love you, Mrs. Edward. I love you too, Mr. Edward. 6 years later, Sunday morning. The brownstone was alive with chaos. Maya, no. Stephanie lunged for their 3-year-old daughter. Before she could finger paint the wall again. But, Mommy, I'm making art. Make it on paper, baby, please. Jason appeared in the doorway. 5-year-old twins, Caleb and Lucas, hanging off each arm. Who wants pancakes? Me. 3 voices shrieked in unison. Stephanie caught Jason's eye across the beautiful disaster of their living room, and they both started laughing. This sticky hands and crayon marks and toys everywhere, this was everything. After breakfast became a syrup catastrophe, and baths became a water park. The kids finally went down for naps. Jason and Stephanie collapsed on the stoop. Their stoop, with coffee and comfortable silence. Think we're doing okay? Stephanie asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. Jason looked up at their building. The windows that had once felt haunted, now filled with light and laughter and love. The place where 2 scared kids had once pretended not to love each other, now home to a family built on second chances. Yeah, he said, kissing her hair. I think we're doing just fine. Stephanie smiled, lacing her fingers through his. Me too. And there on the brownstone steps where their story began, Jason and Stephanie sat together, choosing each other over and over. The way home is chosen, not because it's easy, but because it's theirs. Sometimes love doesn't fail because it isn't real. Sometimes it fails because the truth was said too late. Remember this, choosing love is rarely easy, but silence always costs more than honesty. If this story stayed with you, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need this reminder. Vintage Mike Tales,